There probably isn't a person that doesn't at some point ask me about negative intention. So our first session this afternoon is going to tackle the unmentionable. We all want to know how to stop thinking bad thoughts. If we're all leaky buckets, how do we stop sending out negative intention? And if we are leaky buckets receiving all the time and everybody else is a leaky bucket, how do we stop ourselves from receiving negative energy? So we're going to address that with a few, but I want you to think about a couple of concepts. First of all, the very simple concept that most negative intention is inside you. What you're receiving, most of what you think you're receiving is oftentimes your take on the situation. And also, most of us walk around in judgment. Most of us walk around with negative thoughts streaming through our heads. How many people in the audience think happy thoughts most of the time? Hands. More than usual, that's very good. Excellent. But as you noticed, the vast majority did not raise their hand because we all spend our time looking at the glass being half full. We all spend our time judging. It's a little internal monologue that goes something like, look how you muffed that one, or my kid is really bad at maths. I wonder what I should do about it. That person doesn't like me, and on it goes, that internal monologue of negative thinking. So one of the first things you have to do is start becoming conscious of what it is that you're thinking. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that you turn off thought. That will be almost impossible. It's been suggested in many quarters, but we're human. We were given cognitive thinking as a blessing or curse, and it is both at different times. But it's more about just stepping one step back to start observing what it is you're thinking. A very simple thing to do is just to start writing it down. Just take one day and write down what you think. Every time you have a thought, write it down in a little journal, and then look at it at the end of the day and weigh it. You could even do it in 2 columns, one positive, one negative. Look at what you're thinking and see how it ends up stacking. If you're like most people, it's 80% negative and about 20% positive. And particularly keep a separate column for what you think about yourself. And note that there's almost never a time where you give yourself applause. There's almost never a time that you think anything at all. If you do something positive, you usually don't think about it. If you do something, you don't think, boy, I did a good job there. You wait for somebody else to tell you that. But ordinarily, you only start thinking about yourself when it's something you don't like. I look too fat in that dress. I got a really low grade. I can't stand the way I talk to people. I'm so shy, and on and on and on. The thoughts you reserve for yourself are the worst thoughts you usually have. So just start becoming aware of that and start noting it down. What I'm trying to get you to is to start becoming aware of what it is you're really sending most of the time. Remember, if you're a leaky bucket, you're sending intention with every thought you have. And what you have to do is start looking at what it is you're sending and weigh it up as positive or negative. The other thing I want you to think about is to be careful what you wish for. We talked about being specific yesterday. This is a picture of Heather Mills McCartney, now Heather Mills. And I put it up because Heather Mills wanted more than anything else to be famous. This consumed her as a young person. She was desperate to be famous. And in that process and that intention, she married one of the most famous people in the world. And as a result of that, the press got hold of her and dug up every last skeleton in her closet. And there were many. She had a background that she had done pornography. She was a prostitute. She had all sorts of things. And now she is one of the most infamous women in England. She's famous, all right, but famous for all the wrong things. So I'm suggesting that you be responsible for your thoughts and what you want, and start thinking about what it would mean. What's the nth degree? And I don't have a value judgment on this, if your real intention is to be wealthy, seriously wealthy, you must think, what are the implications of that? Can I manage that wealth? Can I manage those things? Am I okay with all those things? What am I going to do with my wealth? That will take extra time. Or if I want to be married, are you ready to be married? Can you handle the responsibility of marriage? Or I want a child. Are you ready to step outside the center of your own life? That's what it's going to take to be a parent. So those kinds of questions are things you must ask yourself. And this is part and parcel of the whole idea of identifying what it is you really want. Well, Heather Mills did not want to be infamous, but she just sent out an intention to the world to be famous. And she surely is. She's on every cover of OK and Hello magazine. But it's all the wrong publicity. So be careful and specific about what it is you want. I put up the fact that we all use murderous thoughts because we do, routinely, for illness. Cancer patients have been told to use intention to kill the cancer. Now that's murder. And I have looked and looked at the data on intention, hoping to be able to say to people like you, happy thoughts, positive thoughts, they're more powerful than negative thoughts. But it's not true. The data that's out there, the science that's out there, demonstrates that a negative thought is just as powerful as a positive thought. There have been studies, and many of them, of intention masters, like Qigong masters, sending intention to inhibit a plant or make it grow. And they've used positive and alternating positive and negative intention, sending positive intention to make something grow, then sending negative intention to inhibit it. And they found they have an equal effect. They can stop a plant growing with their thoughts. They can make a plant grow faster with their thoughts. Many studies, remember, you can't really use studies to try to murder people. It's probably going to go against a few ethical reviews. Sometimes we wouldn't know about that in terms of drug trials. You'd think, you think that seems to be a license to get away with murder. But in most cases, we obviously can't send negative intention to people. So what they tend to do with these studies is use bacteria or fungi or something that people don't mind sending murderous thoughts to. And they found that ordinary people can send intention to inhibit bacteria or inhibit fungi or inhibit things like E. coli, which is alternately a blessing and a curse to the human system. And they found they can inhibit it if they want to. So I was interested in this, and I wondered, what's more powerful, sending a negative intention for cancer or what? And there's been one very interesting study about this. It was with a healer who felt uncomfortable about sending negative intention. He felt, if I send negative intention to the cancer, I might miss. My aim might be off that day, and I'll actually hit and kill the host. So he was in the study using 5 different methods of trying to kill cancer cells. In one, he was supposed to send intention to kill them. Another was to send them into the void. Another was one other kind of murderous thought. And then he had 2 that were one was to carry out God's will, and the other was to return things to the natural order of perfect health. He did that intention, and it turned out to be the most powerful. Returning it to natural order and perfect health. Now, the even more powerful one was when he concentrated very specifically on certain cancer cells. So he combined being specific with sending an intention to return to the natural order. Now, this is only one study. It's hard to make any generalizations about it. But this is what I come up with from that. I think that might be all about sending a specific intention, but turning it around in a positive way. So instead of saying, I want to kill cancer cells, and visualizing them dying, and that's what lots of the cancer alternative pioneers talked about. They did a lot of visualization of imagining cancer cells in a kind of battle with your healthy cells, or even imagining the cancer cells being eaten up by a video game like Pac-Man, you know. Those are all kind of negative intentions in a sense. But I think perhaps the more powerful thought is a positive intention of imagining all of your healthy cells, or all of your cancer cells transmuting into healthy cells, or this healthy cells kind of taking reign, or something where you're returning to the natural order. So I hope that's clear. The idea of being very specific, but turning it around in a positive way, may be the most powerful of all.
That's what Emoto did with the water.
Yeah, that's what Emoto did with the water, as she says, is sending a positive message to the water, and we saw the water crystals create these beautiful patterns. Now, this is another thing we don't have time to talk about business, and I'd like to do that as a whole separate workshop, and we were just talking about that at lunch break, because we've done sections of Living the Field just on work in the field, and it's a whole other issue. But I want you to just keep this in mind when you're looking at your life in relation to everything else and looking at negative intention. Competition is negative intention. Now, we don't think of that. We foster competition. And, you know, and I've got a very sporty younger kid, and I'm oftentimes there at her matches going, yes, go! And because I'm, you know, American, you know, we've got all these very polite English people kind of quietly cheering, and I'm there being the loudest mom in the, you know, in the sidelines there, yelling and screaming for Anya. But I think about that, and I come away and I think, well, okay, how do we now tell our kids, this is just a game, this is what you shouldn't be doing in real life? And I think that this is something we should just stop long enough to think about, because competition permeates every bone of our body. And remember, competition is I win at somebody else's expense. It is about my significance at the expense of someone else. And I just want you to think about things in another way, which is, it is possible, perfectly possible, to run your business, to work in your job, and not be competitive. You don't have to watch and note, make mental noting about how other people fail, because that isn't going to make you any more significant than you are already. And if we're all connected, if they fail, you fail. You don't have to run your business to beat out all your competitors. I've been interested in collecting stories of people where everybody gets ahead by sharing data. You know, it's possible to go out there and be cooperative. I hope I gave you a little glimpse of that. The animal kingdom is very interesting because there's very little gratuitous killing. You know, there's very little gratuitous killing. People talk about, oh, no, it's all about competition and only the strongest survive. Not true. An animal eats because it needs to. An animal doesn't kill gratuitously. We're the only animal on earth that kills gratuitously. And so in that sense, we are the most competitive of all. It's not mirrored in the animal model. So step back for a moment. You don't have to teach your children about being significant by being an individual at other people's expense. That is a negative intention, because in a sense, you are saying, I win, you lose. Now, I put this up as one of the awfulest, ugliest pictures I can think of myself, because I want to illustrate things that happened to me, in a sense, by accident. I heard of somebody else. Wasn't there somebody in the audience talking about their force field and how they broke things? Didn't somebody say that in the audience? Yes. Do you have an effect on equipment, is it? You have an effect on equipment. So do I. But I'll tell you about that in a minute. I also seem to have, I'm fearful that I might have an effect on people when I'm in a bad mood, too. Brian and I, 9 years ago, moved into a house in southwest London, and we got an Art Deco house. And it was a wreck when we got it, and we decided to take on the project of renovating this. And we thought, well, we both love Art Deco, so we'll make it Art Deco. So I spent a lot of time, and we spent a lot of hard-earned cash putting this house back together. And we had just moved in 3 weeks later. And I had a very sweet cleaner who was very overenthusiastic with the scale removal. And as you know, if you're not from England, you may not know this, but for anyone in England, we have very hard water here. So she's scrubbing along, and I get back from work, and I see that she has accidentally scrubbed off all the chrome and all the brand new taps in the house. So I die a quiet death. I go to my bed. I freak out. I don't know how to discharge my anger. She's already gone home. And I scream and yell, and I hit some pillows. And I learn the next week that at about the time I was doing that, she fell off the bus and broke her leg. So I wondered to myself, did I do that? And I had a similar experience some months later. As you know, if you're from England, everything in our banks is controlled by direct debits and by computer. And one month, Brian and I noticed that all of our checks, all of our direct debits were bouncing. Our mortgage payment was bouncing. Everything was bouncing. And we were freaking out, thinking, this shouldn't be. And so we found, to our horror, that the bank didn't register one of our paychecks. And I was so angry about this because I know even with that kind of mistake, it affects your credit rating and this and that, et cetera, et cetera. Mortgages, lenders aren't very patient about such things. So I was irrationally angry and just had to be angry at something or someone. So I directed all my anger at my bank manager. Now, she had nothing to do with this. She's a lovely lady. But to my horror, the next week, I found that at just about the time I was venting my spleen, she fell on the pavement and broke all of her front teeth. And I started thinking to myself, by this time I'm getting very paranoid, and I'm thinking, don't have a bad mood, and God knows what you're going to do to the teen. So I have no idea if I'm affecting people or not. These could have been strange coincidences. I don't know. But I only put this up to say, if we are leaky buckets, and notice, even in our little practice sessions, when you were sending and receiving, people were picking up changes of thoughts. One of the people in our audience, Aransu, told me that her partner sent her red heart and then changed his mind and sent her sword. Now, the initial thing was she picked up red heart. She picked up the original message, and then she got us change, and she came up with sword, which actually is shaped like a heart, too. I mean, like a flower, too. Oh, no, it was sword. It was flower, and you picked up sword. So that was a bit like a flower. So she was picking up his changes of information almost in real time. And that happens a lot. We hear this a great deal from people doing this kind of experiment. So your unintentional intentions are not locked inside your head. Your anger and frustration at people are not locked inside your head. They're beaming out, and they are affecting people around you at every moment. So this is just, again, a caution to be aware of them, to step back one step and be aware of them. And besides people, to consider everything else around you. There are two kinds of people in this world. There are angels and there are gremlins. And this is actually, scientists talk about this. It's a well-established fact that some people have a positive effect on equipment and some people a negative effect. There was a scientist, dear scientist, called Jacques Benveniste, who has done the work on memory of water. And he found really interesting material that molecules all have a unique resonance, their own unique sound, if you will. And if you play that sound to another molecule, without having the original molecule present, you can affect a chemical reaction. Just the frequency can cause the reaction. So he wanted to convince the orthodoxy of this. So he decided to remove humans from the experiment and just have a robot doing this. And the robot had an arm where it would kind of swing over and mix the material and get a little coil with the sound of a molecule and play it and just do this whole kind of experiment without humans. And he found his robot worked perfectly, except in the presence of one woman. Now, Benveniste was the most charming Frenchman, and he was a terrible chauvinist. In fact, and he was very funny, too, because I met him during the time of the Monica Lewinsky scandal in America with President Clinton. And he turned to me and said, "We French, we can't understand this. Our president would be impeached if he didn't have a mistress." So I loved that story. So he said to himself, thinking this woman is the cause of all of this, "Cherchez la femme," look to the woman. And that, of course it's going to be a woman, as he said. So he thought to himself, well, there's something about her force field that's ruining this machine. So who would the machine love? And he thought, well, the machine's probably going to love its inventor. So he brings the inventor to the machine, and the machine starts working again. So he thinks, well, I can't have the inventor around. The machine's happy, so I'll put an electromagnetic shield around it and shield it from this woman. And when he did, the machine would stop working altogether. So then he thought, this is probably going to be a little bit like witchcraft, but I'll give the inventor a little vial of water to hold for 2 hours. So he does that. He takes the vial of water, he sticks it inside the electromagnetic shield, and from then on, the machine works perfectly. So just as there are enhancers of equipment, there are also detractors. I am a gremlin of the first order. I have a terrifically bad effect on equipment. Friday, my staff was in stitches because I did something and I practically erased my entire hard drive. It suddenly, everything on my desktop just suddenly disappeared. If I'm in an agitated mood, which is only occasionally, I start breaking every piece of equipment in our office. I break computers, and then there was one time I was really agitated. I broke one computer. I went, I went over to another computer. I broke that. And then I went over to the photocopier to photocopy, and that stopped working. And at that point, my staff started edging me toward the door. So there are enhancers and detractors, and I just want you to consider that when you are in a bad mood, you are sending out to your environment, including your inanimate equipment. We have so much evidence from the random event generator studies that you have a profound effect on electronic equipment. So just bear it in mind. I put this thing up, are your motives pure? Because there was a very interesting study of alcoholics. It was a prayer study, and what they did was divided a group of alcoholics in two, and half of them prayed for by their nearest and dearest. And the researchers were astonished to find that the people receiving prayer did worse than the others. Now, they were fascinated by this, and they interpreted this to mean that the people sending intention had mixed motives. They could have been people who were sending intention for increased survival and for them to stop drinking, but not really mean it. Alcoholics are tough to live with. They could have been sending intention, an unconscious intention, for that person to die and to free them. Or they could be a codependent. They could be somebody who was also a drinker and didn't want to lose his or her drinking buddy. So when you're sending intention, it's important to think about what it is you're really sending. We all pretend to send happy thoughts, including to people who we don't like very much. But we have to try to get to that place of real sense of compassion and real understanding of what it is we're sending. I just want to look at this whole idea, too, of psychic bubble. A lot of people think of protection as just that, a wall. I want to create a psychic bubble around myself so that all the awful people at work who are constantly glaring at me or sniping at me or whatever can't get to me. I want you to think about this in terms of what we've talked about all weekend. If we are all one, if we are trying to establish connection, the last thing you want to do is create a psychic bubble, a barrier to that. Besides which, I'm not clear that it works. There have been 2 studies of this by William Broad, the guy whose name I couldn't remember yesterday, the psychologist. I had a senior moment, I guess. William Broad did a lot of work on seeing if you could psychically shield yourself from intention. So he would have 2 groups, one sending intention to the other, And oftentimes when they do these kinds of studies, they register the effect by measuring the autonomic nervous system of the recipient. And they find when somebody sends an intention, even if they stare at the other person without the person knowing it, the recipient will receive a change in his autonomic nervous system, almost like a shock. So we're constantly picking up all the time. It's been demonstrated. So he wanted to see if the recipients could think of a barrier to this. And so he had them think of whatever barrier worked for them, a moat, a brick wall, anything like that. And he found, in one case, it worked. The people thinking of a wall, etc., would stop that kind of effect on the autonomic nervous system. They would, in a sense, protect themselves. They tried to replicate it, and they found it didn't work. So I think from there's no good evidence to show that works, and it also doesn't make sense. If you're trying to open yourself up to intention, I think there's a better way. I think instead of protection, you want surrender. And let me suggest this in certain ways. I think you look at protecting yourself from the perspective of relationship. There are two ways to see this. One is the idea that it's not a single bad thing coming to you, but it's the relationship. You know, Clinton's comment, it's the economy stupid. It's almost like we need to say, is the relationship stupid to ourselves? And of course, not really calling ourselves stupid, because that would be a negative intention. But just constantly thinking of it ourselves in relationship. If you're having a bad time with someone else, it's your relationship that's the problem, not them being bad guys. So one of the first and simplest ways of doing something with them is to send them a positive intention. You know, I love this book, The Gentle Art of Blessing, because the guy in this, the author, had a terrible situation. He was pushed out of his own company. And for years, he just resented the people who had done this to him. He thought they'd taken away everything. And then he realized that the person who was really harmed by this was himself. So he stopped doing that. He started sending blessing to these people who had harmed them. He blessed everything about them. May they flourish and multiply. He blessed their children. He wanted them to have great riches. He sent blessing, blessing, blessing. And suddenly, he found his life was turning around. It wasn't just they who were the recipients of good intention. He was the recipient of good intention. He was getting all the benefit, and their relationship changed. So I throw this out as a suggestion. I know there are occasions where some people are just so on a different plane than you are that you can't come together. But before you try that, before you conclude that, just try some positive intention to them. Just send out intention to your worst nightmare and see what happens to it. Send intention to the person who is just making your life a misery and see if that doesn't change the relationship. I think any kind of positive intention can heal any kind of situation. And I think we found from just our little story of the runaway that it doesn't have to be a bodily problem. It can also be a psychic problem. So try that and just see. But it's about really getting to that place of compassion for that person, really walking a mile in their shoes and really seeing where they're coming from. And that gets you in that place of compassion. Even if you have to imagine things, imagine why they're so angry at you. Imagine why it is they're making your life a living hell. What is it from their perspective? And if you can see it from their perspective, you might be able to send out a pure intention. But there's another interesting way of doing this too. I think, you know, besides psychic bubble, one thing that's been really interesting to me are two elements. And they both come from the work of John Diamond. Dr. John Diamond is one of my favorite healers. And he's a dear friend of both of ours. He pioneered behavioral kinesiology with the very recently deceased George Goodheart, who developed kinesiology, which is muscle testing. George Goodheart made the most brilliant intuitive leap that a noxious substance of any sort placed on your body makes your muscles weak. So if you're allergic to something, you're not just allergic to it in terms of hives or whatever, but if you put that that substance on yourself, your muscles would test weak too. So Dr. Diamond was one of the first to make an intuitive leap that toxic thoughts would also create weakness in the body. And it's quite amazing to watch him. He'll sit there with a subject and say, your mother doesn't love you. And all of a sudden, boom, their arm goes down. You have a flat tire, and boom, their arm goes down. That annoying neighbor is right there in the other room, and boom, their arm will go down. Any kind of negative thinking will make their muscle test weak. So he was very interested in this. He wondered what it is that keeps an arm strong. And he came up with this idea, the homing thought, which is he called it a homing thought because he was thinking of pilots who were off course and suddenly having to find their way home. And he found over thousands of testing, and he's muscle tested so many people. He's found that over all of these testings, the one thing that keeps your arm strong is your mission statement, which is your divine purpose, the thing that you were put on this earth to do. And I think I said earlier in the weekend, this doesn't have to be a grand job. You don't have to be the Prime Minister of England. You don't have to be changing the world. You can be a fantastic gardener. You can be somebody who just enjoys a great conversation. You might be the best neighbor of your block, somebody who helps the people who are in need. You might be somebody who finds it most rewarding of all to go read a story to an old person. You can be somebody who's a fantastic cook, or that totally undervalued activity. You can be a really great mother. Any of these things if they put you in touch with the divine, that is your purpose. It is, in a sense, your mission statement. Now, I want to take this idea one step further and throw out this possibility that you are an intention experiment. You and your life are an intention statement. Everything you do and say are all part of your intention experiment, all part of your intention statement. And so what's very important is to make that mission statement coherent. Many people, as I said earlier in Saturday, have an intention to do good in the world, but their work is highly destructive. You know, I had a woman who was a really lovely woman who worked for me, was really interested in philanthropy, but she had worked for Coca-Cola. And she just got to the point where she said, I just can't do this anymore. I am rotting the teeth of the children of the world. I can't do this anymore. And so that's one thing, to look at your work. Is your work consistent with your mission statement in some way? It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be the central mission statement, but as long as it isn't conflicting your real mission statement. And so look at that. Look at how you are in your relationships. Are you, like I told you before, that wonderful psychologist who was a great philanthropist who realized only after his wife walked out the door that he'd been ignoring her and his family for years in his zeal to be a do-gooder? Look at your communal intention statement. How are you with your community? I hope to create another community for you with this weekend. But how is that working with your intention? Is that coherent? All of these things, all of your life, should be coherent as an intention experiment. Now, you can find your life's central mission statement if you don't know it already. How many people have a coherent mission statement they understand is their divine purpose? How many people? How many people are still confused about what that might be? Okay, we've got about half and half. I figured we might. So I have a few little exercises that I thought you might want to take a few minutes to do. One is looking at your natural talents as a child. And you'll find them, I believe it's in page 5 or 6? It is page 6. You'll see, find your life's central intention. And here are some questions you might want to take some time answering. What were your natural talents as a child? What were your natural skills that come the easiest? What were the accomplishments that you had? I'm just reading these out, but they're all in there. So you can take some time mulling them over. And we'll just share for a few minutes when we come back. What were your accomplishments that you had, you effortlessly did? I watch my daughter, Anya. Our daughter, Anya, is a natural kinesthetic genius. She is a brilliant athlete. Everything she throws the ball, it's out of sight. She connects with the ball with a bat, it's out of sight. She runs fast. Anything she does, she's a netball genius. But she's also kinesthetic in every regard. She's a brilliant dancer, and her sense of space is fantastic. She drives once someplace, and she knows exactly how to get there, which is great, because I never know. So that is her accomplishments come easiest to her when it's that kind of area. That's her particular genius, and it's what fills her with joy. I watch her in activity, and I can see she's got the life force right there. So look at things like that. Any other activity that puts you in touch with the divine, what is it that you do that stops you from even thinking about the time? That just where you lose time, you lose a sense of even being there. You are transported. Whatever that is that listening to music? Is it playing music? You know, and identify what aspect of it is that you really love. And when you've started looking at all of those kinds of things, from when you were a child to now, then start looking at your strong trends and visualize yourself doing these activities. You can even, we don't really have time today to teach muscle testing, nor am I an expert at it. But you can, if you've done it before, get tested or have yourself tested. When you're holding that thought of that is your life's mission statement, are you holding a strong thought? And if somebody then throws a negative word toward you, do you continue to test strong? And that will give you the sense of the power of this. And the reason I suggest this is because I believe that when you are being, as it were, attacked by negative intention or weakened in your own mind by negativity, that is, of course, going to come your way at some point. I believe the strongest and most effective counter to that is just holding on to what you were put on this earth to do. Just holding on to your divine purpose, your mission statement. And that, just honing in on that, can be one of the most potent things there is. All of those questions I have on your sheets so you can look at them. While you're doing that, I'd also like you to think about the size of your resistance. Because many times when we have a desire to change our life's purpose, we also have a lot of limiting beliefs. So one of the other things that I'd like you to write down is the size of your resistance. How big is it? How much does it weigh? Get a sense of it. Even look at it physically, if that helps. But write down some of the reasons why you can't do this. And then look at those, really look at those, and see if they truly are as big as you think. Into the intention experiment, because I've talked this weekend mostly, and we've both discussed and worked with you on living with intention. But what we're trying to do as well is to demonstrate that there actually is a science to intention, and that intention works on a mass scale. And that's the whole idea of the intention experiment, to actually test that. How far can we go? How far do our thoughts matter in terms of changing the world? So I don't know if you're aware of this, but the intention experiment is a living book. So it's not only a book about the science of intention, but it's also an ongoing experiment. in which I involved the readers in what is the biggest mind over matter experiment in history. We have been running a number of experiments. We've started with just a little leaf in a group in London in 2007, March 2007. And we had an audience a bit bigger than this, about 400 people. And I asked them to send intention to one of two leaves that were in Arizona. We've been working with the University of Arizona. Dr. Gary Schwartz the noted psychologist, has generously given his time, as have a number of other noted scientists. And he has his special camera equipment that I showed you yesterday. We sent intention to make the leaf glow. He didn't know which leaf we sent it to. He then put both leaves under his special equipment and found that the leaf sent intention was truly glowing. And he said to me, called me up after I unblinded the study, because as I said, he took those measurements before he knew which leaf we'd sent intention to. And he was very excited. He calls me up and he says, Lynn, you won't believe it. This leaf is glowing so much that the other one is darker than usual. It's almost been neglected. So we were encouraged by that. And we went to a series of germination intention experiments. We wanted to see if we could make plants grow faster with our thoughts. This time, we had 4 sets of things being experimented on, 4 sets of 30 seeds. And I decided to run the first experiment in Sydney, Australia. The 4 sets of seeds, meanwhile, were sitting back in the Tucson, Arizona lab. I had the audience choose one of the 4 sets of seeds. Once again, the scientists didn't know which ones we sent. We sent intention for them to grow faster and grow a certain number of centimeters by a certain number of days. The scientists, when we were done, planted all 4 sets of seeds. And lo and behold, the one sent intention grew significantly higher. So then everywhere I went, I started running this experiment. I ran it with a group of 100 in Rhinebeck, New York, sending intention to in Arizona. I ran it from Hilton Head, South Carolina. I ran it from Austin, Texas. I ran it over the internet with thousands of people from many countries around the globe. And in each instance, we had a significant effect. The plants grew faster. Those little seeds in Arizona were affected by people sending intention from thousands of miles away. So then we moved on to water. And we just sent love to water, a kind of an Emoto experiment, this time working with the physicist, Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, sending love to see if we could change anything in its photonic emissions, because water, as well as living things, has light emissions. And we found that we had an effect. So we moved on to trying to change its cluster structure, because water clusters together. The molecules of water cluster together like the rooms of a house. And there are little weak bonds that occur between these molecules. Up to 100 molecules can cluster together in a very strange formation. And the scientists believe that these can be changed by subtle mechanisms, electromagnetic fields, but also intention. And that changing that cluster structure may change water from ordinary water to healing water. So we've tried that. Our first intention experiment was run with Penn State University with water. And we've come up with a result they can't figure out how to quantify. We did something to the water, but they're not sure what. They have to go back and get more sensitive equipment. So they're doing that. We're doing the water experiment again. But of course, the implications of the water experiment are enormous. Look at the globe and how much water there is. You yourself are a giant water vessel, as we talked about. You yourself are also a tape recorder. Remember, we talked about the fact that water magnifies the signal. So if we can change water, we can change so many things in the world. We're working in the future on a bacteria experiment with water, in trying to mutate bad bacteria to good bacteria. If we can affect that, we might be able to affect polluted water. We have a number of other experiments I'll talk to you about in a moment that I'd like you to join me in. But I also want to talk to you about the power of the group, because somebody said to me, you know, well, what about, people are sending me negative intention, and I still don't know how to really ward that off. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story that happened to me in Austin, Texas. I was talking in front of a group, and there was a woman who was very agitated, obviously wasn't enjoying herself in this workshop, very similar to this. So she came up to me and started really criticizing it. And she finally just turned to me and said, "You're a joke." And I went, ooh, you know, the force of her anger really knocked me back. So I just realized that she was being very disruptive. So I did what I usually don't do, and I said, "I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave." And I was so upset by the whole experience that I started to tear up. And all of a sudden, out from the audience, everybody came up, one by one, and created a giant donut around me. And by the time they'd finished, there were 4 or 5 people deep, just holding hands around me. It was like a power hug. And it was one of the strongest experiences I've ever had, besides meeting Brian, I think. But it was such a powerful antidote to negative intention. It's another reason why we want to create these little groups. Whenever you feel beset and overwhelmed by life's tough road, you know you've got a group here to engage in a group hug. I also want to tell you something else about negative intention. You know, somebody was talking to me, a philosopher actually, and saying that oftentimes the reason we fight back when somebody criticizes us is that we're not sure of ourselves. You know, she said, imagine going into your doctor's office and him saying, "I'm sorry to tell you this, Mrs. Hubbard, but you're actually a rabbit." Well, I would just laugh at that. I wouldn't say anything to it. I would just say, "Yeah, right." And that's because of the certainty I know that I'm a woman. And this is the same kind of certainty we have to bring to things in knowing who we are, that divine purpose. Once you really know who you are, no matter what anybody throws at you, they probably can't knock you back. So these are our intention experiments. We're planning and creating a little Gaia sphere. It's a little glass terrarium, like a mini world, working with the University of Arizona. And we're going to fill it with primitive animals and plants and see if we can affect the temperature or the CO2 levels with our thoughts. And if we can, that will have enormous significance and potential to cure ecological problems. We're going to do that pollution experiment I talked to you about. We're also creating, and this has happened almost despite myself, it's kind of turned into a live aid of intention experiments. We're running a series of peace intention experiments, attempting to lower violence in hotspots around the world. I mentioned this to Deepak Chopra when I was on his radio show, and he immediately said he would like the Alliance for New Humanity to be involved. I mentioned it to the Association of Global New Thought, and she said, "I'm going to get entire churches to be involved, and let's run it on September 14th, our first one, because it's right after 9/11, and it'll be a wonderful antidote to those memories and those photographs that keep showing up on the anniversary." So we're going to be running it with entire New Thought churches on September 14th. So please write down that date. And we're running, then the Unity churches got involved. And then the Spiritual Cinema Circle got involved, and Gaiam. And before long, we have the potential of hundreds of thousands of people being involved with this intention experiment. So please write down this date, and please check our website and join in on these intention experiments. All it requires is 10 minutes of your time to do something that may change the world. The other thing you can do is go away with your own intention experiments. One of the ones that we talk about is to try to do something that never happens in your life. So if you're a woman and your husband never brings you flowers, you know how I said don't try to do anything coercive? Well, this is the exception to the rule. So send an intention to have him send you flowers, and if it changes, if something happens, you'll know your intentions had an effect. Or if you're a man and you love football and your woman can't stand it, send an intention for her to come and sit down and watch the Arsenal game with you and see what happens. Or if your kids never make their beds, as ours never do. Send an intention. We're still working on that one, to have them make their beds. I had a woman tell me about this in London. We've had several do the flower thing and have really amazing results. This one woman in England, garden center with my husband, he never buys me flowers. And I was so overwhelmed by all those beautiful flowers that I sent an intention to him to do this. We were standing in line to pay, and all of a sudden he rushed away. And he came back with this giant pot of gardenias. And he said, I just had this, it was almost like a mental order. I just had to go out and get flowers. If you do this, report on our website, please. Tell everybody what's happened. We wanted to show you our masters of intention. You know about Ollie. Whenever Ollie wants a walk, he gets it. He sends this psychic message to Brian, and Brian all of a sudden picks up the lead. And this is our daughter, Anya. And Anya, what Anya wants, Anya often gets. We found this lately. She's lost her iPod. So being good parents, we've said, no, you have to save up your money and buy your own. So she's now working us. She called us up when we were in Chicago and said, while you're there, do you think you could pick up an iPod for us? And we said, no, we're, you're going to have to save up. So she's been taking to leaving pictures of us, of iPods, by our bed every night, seeing if that might do it, leaving a little trail of pictures, or calling us up and saying, you know, that iPod I saw, you know, I don't want it anymore. She's even trying reverse psychology. So I know this is a master of intention in the making. Before we leave you, we want to just let you know that we have discussion groups. We've started on our website, Living the Field, livingthefield.com, tools for a new world. And we're starting discussion groups. We have things like Children in the Field. So we invite you to be part of those discussion groups. We offer free downloads that people can have to spark the discussion. But we also ask everybody in a community to share some of their information about trying to create a new world together. We have weekly e-news, and you're welcome to sign on for either Living the Field news or the Intention Experiment. So it's livingthefield.com or theintentionexperiment.com. I'll have the websites up in a minute, don't worry. And you get e-news from us. And also, those are e-news, both of those are written by me every week. And don't forget What Doctors Don't Tell You for weekly information about health. And that one is written by Brian. He's very funny. People love just laughing about medicine, etc. with him. So please look at our other website too. And don't forget to come back to our Intention Experiment site after this weekend. We'll notify you, but your group will be up there and you can continue the journey. So I want to leave you with this little story about this bear who came over the mountain. As you can see, this is a polar bear who just wandered into Canada's Hudson Bay one day. And Norbert Rosling is a photographer, and he was there with a bunch of husky dogs. And he was suddenly alarmed when he saw this polar bear because he figured, oh my goodness, my huskies are lunch for this bear. So he was terrified. He thought, there they go, eat or be eaten. But he was astonished because the bear just wanted to play. And the bear came around at the end of the day at dusk just to play with those dogs. And he ended up coming back night after night to play with those dogs. So maybe one good thought is all it takes to change the world. Thank you very much.